We welcome the Secretary General of Caricom, His Excellency Erwin Larocque, who is here to formally hand over a briefing document prepared for the Honorable Premier of Montserrat as the newly appointed Premier of Montserrat. We acknowledge the Honorable Premier and also the Minister of Agriculture, Trade, Housing, Land and the Environment, the Honorable Claude Hogan.
I couldn't imagine any more perfect timing than today, after we've already gone through our budget discussions and that's behind us. We were able to sit with him and engage in very interesting and fruitful discussions, I must say. I welcome him to Montserrat once again. I hope he's enjoyed his stay. And certainly I won't be taking his time because he's the star of the show this afternoon. One thing I would say is that from our meetings with the ministers today, I think we are at home with you. We feel we're comfortable that you're a people's person. And I know that with your next visit, as you've promised, we will be able to go further into discussions and engage the media, the public, and the youth that you're so happy to engage, as you announced.
My visit was here to pay a courtesy call on the Honourable Premier. It's a normal practice that when a new head of government comes into office that I should brief our head of government on the current state of play of our integration arrangement, and to hear from the Premier in terms of how we could develop greater relationship in the sense of Caricom being attending to the needs as far as is possible within the resource constraints we have of the people and government of Montserrat. It was a very interesting visit, very interesting itinerary. I paid a courtesy call, of course, on the Premier. I also paid a courtesy call on the acting governor. I had a brief exchange of views on Caricom with him. And of course, we met with the Cabinet of Ministers, which I think went very, very well. And if you'll just forgive me for breaking protocol, Claude, Minister Hogan, I have to get used to calling him Mr. Hogan, is not only a colleague from a long time. I think of him as Mr. Caricom in Montserrat. Again, I felt at home with friends. I took the opportunity, of course, to brief the Premier and his colleague ministers in terms of what is happening in Caricom, our program. The fact that we've very recently adopted a first ever community strategic plan that sought to identify a number of areas of priority focus for integration arrangements going forward. And the strategic plan is built on a resilience model, and I think nowhere else better to have spoken about it, albeit in a limited way, other than in Montserrat, where the people of Montserrat have shown such resilience and continue to show such resilience 20 years after the volcano, and to see the developments. Every time I come to Montserrat, I see improvements, of course, and it's just so wonderful to be here. So basically, we spoke about how it is that our integration arrangements, in particular the family of institutions, can be of assistance in one way or another. And I have to stress within our limited area of capacity, because everybody does have resource constraints. We spoke of the area of renewable energy. We spoke about building capacity in areas such as statistics. We spoke about building capacity through other institutions, possibly in areas of health, what can be done again. And I have pledged to the Premier and to his colleagues that whatever I can do, I will do. And I regret very much that my visit is very short and that I wish to come back for a more extensive visit and to meet with not just the Cabinet of Ministers, but the people of Montserrat, and to meet with you media people as not as in a press conference, but as partners, as stakeholders. I think too often we view the media houses as merely reporters, but you are also Caricom citizens. You're also media houses, and you have a stake in what we're doing. And I would very often like to hear from you in terms of how we can improve on what we do as well. And of course, to meet the youth. I think it's very cliche, but I say it over and over. That's the future of our region. That's the future of our respective countries and the private sector. So I look forward to coming back in not too long from now and to engage with you a little more.
I've welcomed the visit, of course. As you know, we were making roads with respect to a critical element of Montserrat's participation in Caricom, that is the entrustment to the revised treaty accession, and we have gone through discussions on that. I was the change manager also when we participated in the restructuring of the community, as the Secretary General highlighted. And so those are two of the key areas in which we should be progressing as we move from here on in. In addition, of course, the other ministers being involved, one in particular has already engaged Caricom intensely in the area of energy. And so that is those are some of the key issues around which we spoke. And I of course, I'm very pleased that Caricom has re-engaged Montserrat itself as a full member of the Caribbean community. Thank you.
Can you shed some more light? I know you spoke of health and statistics, possibly, and what is the target that you're looking at?
We went through a process of consulting throughout the community for a little more than a year, about a year, to get feedback from not only governments but from civil society, from the people. We visited every single member state, and we visited 2 associate members. So it's quite extensive, and Minister Hogan, before he assumed his current position, was what we call our change driver. He led the process, coordinated the process on the ground. The reason being that our heads of government recognize that and gave a mandate that we need to do some reform in our community. And that is the platform upon which I have laid my tenure as Secretary General. I believe in the reform, it's very necessary. But before you can reform a structure or structures, you need to know where you're going and what you're doing. And hence the strategic plan coming out of a consultative process, and bearing in mind that you're consulting 15 different member states with different experiences and possibly different perspectives, and even within country, you're consulting with different stakeholders, that it was quite a fit to listen to all of this and to try to bring together what you consider to be the common factors going forward. We also recognize that in order to be more impactful in what you do, you need to prioritize your activities. You cannot be all things to all people. You cannot be doing everything, and as a result, you're bound to do some not well. Some you do well and some not well. Whereas if you focus on some strategic areas and build upon them and sort of get them going and then add new ones and so on, it's a better use of the resource constraints that we have, which all of us face resource constraints. All our member states face resource constraints. The demands on development are huge. The institutions of the community as well also face. So you need to really focus on channel. And we came up with the resilience model of aiming at achieving sustainable development and building resilience into everything that we do. And some of the areas that we have identified, economic resilience, human and social resilience, that would include, of course, the development of our people themselves in the sense of education and health, and the environment and how we live and where we live. We looked at issues pertaining to what came out of the consultation as a priority area is information and communication technology. And we need to advance in that area together as a community, recognizing that the ICTs, as they unfold and develop, help countries to improve their service to their population. It helps improve the productivity of our public services. It helps improve competitiveness of our private sector. It's just the way to do things, and we don't want to be left back. So a major issue that came out of the consultations, ICT as a regional approach was pulled out. It's very new for us, so I say that ICT is a new frontier for our development. We looked at issues like energy, for instance, and we know that the cost of energy over the past 4 or 5 years had been skyrocketing. We reached record levels in the cost of energy, and energy, the price of energy to our household is prohibitive. In some countries, some of the statistics shows that households, the poorer communities, pay more than 50% of their bills in energy-related bills in one way or another, and they need to bring down the cost of energy, or to at least have a more predictable cost structure for energy, and the factor of renewable energy also came on board. And a country like the region is blessed with new renewables, and Montserrat, of course, is indeed blessed. Don't always recognize that it is Caricom that is doing something, not necessarily the Secretariat, but Caricom that are doing something. And we, all of us, I probably am a little bit too old to have sat CXC, but all of us who, in a more recent dispensation, for 40 years now, I believe it is, who graduated high school from that period are doing CXC. If you went to school in the region, that is a Caricom initiative. One that is now outside of Caricom. I was in St. Martin yesterday, only for 2 hours, and I met with the Prime Minister of St. Martin, and of course they're using CXC as their education. They've brought it on board from Caricom. So it's something that we're very proud about. And so the governance arrangements to ensure that our institutions, to show that there's coherence among what is being done, to ensure that there's no overlap and more effective use of our resources going forward. And the strategic plan in terms of its own implementation will be done collectively by of course, the Secretariat will seek to coordinate, of course, but the institutions and the member states. And a very important aspect of the strategic plan is the information, reaching out to the people, to be more consultative to our people. And in terms of civil society and our youth, and we have to also bringing in on board speaking to the opposition parties, because as Premier has said, he was in opposition for a number of years. He's the Premier now, and if you're briefed while you're in opposition and you understand what's going on, then the jump-off point is that much shorter, and it goes forward. And it's something that I have been doing. Recently, I've met with a number of. I regret this visit because it's only a few hours that I've not been able to meet with the leader of opposition. I will do so, and as Premier said, I've promised to come back and to not spend a few hours, but at least to spend the night at least and wake up and have a good breakfast here in Montserrat, and then meet with the people and so on. So it's an exciting time for us. It's not an easy reform, and change is never easy, and it is not going to happen overnight. It is such a challenging task because reform is not only about structures. Reform is about changing attitudes, changing persons' minds in terms of how we do things. And human beings are by nature conservative, and we tend not always want to think outside the box. So anytime you have to embody change, it's going to take a little bit of doing. To facilitate me in getting this change, I am in the process of setting up in my office as Secretary General a change office, where I will have an expert in change management that will be advising me. But I am the one who's going to be leading the change process because I need the help and the advice going forward. So in a nutshell, these are some of the areas that we're looking at. In terms of education and youth development in particular, already we've begun looking at some of the issues the plan has called for, and our heads of government, they have established a human resource commission that is going to be looking at the entire human resource development infrastructure in Caricom that looks at not just what we're doing in CXC, but what we do in terms of technical vocational education. The whole idea is to train our citizens to help our citizens better themselves for the future society that we're trying to build. And it's quite an interesting piece of work that we're doing, and we've started already. And there are many, many other such issues that we'll be working on. Okay. Of course, the CSME, the economic part of it, still remains a centerpiece, but we're trying to put more and more the people in the center of our integration arrangements.
The whole integration process, and I know that you've mentioned a number of areas, and you would have discussed with ministers of government here. Mm-hmm. I think one of the critical areas is the implementation part. Mm-hmm. How soon we can see some of these being rolled out?
Mm-hmm. I just mentioned what we've started on at least one, namely the human resource is right in the plan. We've rolled it out. Implementation depends on a number of players. This implementation rests with the member states, and it rests with the Secretariat, and it rests with the institutions. But the critical factor of implementation rests with the member states, in the sense that the Secretariat can create all of the nice policy documents and give all of the best ideas. But if at the ground, on the level of the ground, they're not implemented, then you have an element. Now, we have to find a way of facilitating implementation. I think what we have to do as well, and what we will be doing, is having more consultation before decisions are made so that you're clear. You don't wake up one day and you take a decision tomorrow and then you sit back and say, okay, it requires this, this, and that. We need to find out first what needs to be done to get something done. And it's best if you plan better. It takes a little longer in the planning stage, but when you get off the ground, you can get it done. And I think it's a new way we're going to be doing things. And but it's going to be a partnership. It has to be a partnership with the Caricom Secretariat and the member states going forward. Of course, capacity to implement is something that one has to look at. I think too often it is said that there's lack of political will. And myself, having worked in very senior positions in government before I became Secretary General, I understand what capacity constraints mean. I understand when demands are being made on a government to do many things, first from the domestic constituency, and resources are limited, plus you have your regional constituency, your regional obligations, and you have your international obligations. So sometimes one has to factor that in. And one thing I can say, first of all, being able to interact with heads of government, that there's a firm political will. The political will to integrate our community is there. There's no doubt in my mind. And when I speak with the people, once they begin to understand what we're doing, the reaction is, well, why haven't we been doing this before? We need to do it. And if you were not doing it, then we'd have to reinvent it. So the will is there. What we have to work on is building the capacity to get it done, and to get it done in a realistic time frame. I am an eternal optimist. If I were not an eternal optimist, I would not be in this job. And I'm going to give it my all during my tenure.
What elements of your plan also include looking at ways of weaning us from international aid, which often becomes the limitation to a project actually becoming successful?
Well, first of all, let me just say that constraints are twofold. They're both financial, but they're also related to the human resource. Because you can put this room full of money, and if you don't have the people to spend it right, it ain't going to get spent. Okay, so there's a twofold factor in that, and capacity does not only reside in capacity constraint does not only reside in a government. It resides in the private sector. It resides in our citizens. We just need to. That's why I said we're looking at our whole human capacity development apparatus to ensure that we prepare our citizens for the future. Just want to put us aside. Wean on development assistance, I would dare say to you that I don't see that happening in the near future. The development challenges are growing. And some of them are the creations. Take an issue like climate change. The Caribbean didn't create climate change. As a result of climate change, as a result of the industrialized countries spewing the gases into the atmosphere and creating this and global warming, is a creation of developed countries largely. But we are suffering the impact. In the Caribbean, hurricanes are more frequent, they're more intense. And speaking to meteorologists and experts and scientists who serve on the IPC, on the Intergovernmental Group on Climate Change, and they say to you, that when 10 years ago, 15 years ago, a hurricane took 2-3 days to go from a Category 1 to a Category 5. It happens in less than 24 hours now. And hurricanes are spawned in areas where they never spawned before. They just come up, and then you have disasters amounting to 200% of GDP. So all your work that you've done, going back when, is just wiped off, and you have to keep on investing in your capital stock that you not normally have to do. A developed country or countries who have the ability to keep building on their thing. A hospital gets wiped out, a school gets wiped out. You have to rebuild that school. You're not building a new one to add capacity. And I think there has to be a moral responsibility of the international community to the extent that some of these things impinge upon us. The issue of crime and security. How many of us remember being able to leave your home unlocked and that there was no gang violence and there were no guns proliferating our country? I heard a statistic over the weekend for the community. More than 60%, I think I heard maybe close to 70%, I'm not sure of the exact figure now, of deaths are perpetrated by handguns. People with guns in their hands and illegal handguns. What has spawned that? Drugs. Where did the drugs come from? We don't have any cocaine in our region. The drugs are passing through our region to go to the demanders in other countries. They're coming from one country, they're passing through us, and they go in there, and they're leaving their spoils, they're leaving their bad work in our area. Other countries have to have a moral responsibility to share in that. It can't be left for us to be blocking those things. So I dare say that, I'm saying all of that to say that there will always be need for development assistance. Now, we have to become more self-reliant. And I believe that our community as a whole, the talents that we have in our community, residing in our community, in the Caribbean, in Caricom, but also residing in the diaspora. Caribbean people excel wherever they go. And if we can create a community for them that will attract them to come back and contribute, it will certainly help in getting a lot more self-reliant. So I do not foresee in any near future that development assistance would decline. We are saying, and we have been saying internationally now for quite some time, that development assistance can be predicated upon your GDP. Climate change and so on doesn't know what GDP means. You have to look at it from a perspective of being a developmental tool. You get the development assistance, or you have a responsibility now to utilize the money to the best that you get it and the resources to develop your country.
Based on your discussions, do you see any scope for Montserrat to be adding value to Caricom in the areas, especially of disaster management and things like that?
You touched on it immediately there, in that it's clear that it's not just about what we can get from Caricom or the outside world, it's what we have to give. And that's one area where we should have some form of excellence. With regards to disaster preparedness. We've been through hurricanes, we've been through volcanic eruption that has affected us for 20 years. And as Ambassador will let you know, that Montserrat is supposed to lead with St. Lucia in the area of disaster preparedness. When you speak of sustainable development, you have to make sure you cover that area. Montserrat, as I'm learning, needs to strengthen its capacity in that area, although we are called to lead. So there's some areas in which Caricom will be able to assist us. And certainly, as you said, this is something that Montserrat must take some form of responsibility for. In the past 20 years, we've learned a lot. There have been many other islands who may, in the future, face volcanic eruptions. And as I was sharing with him, some of the sad stories at the start of this crisis, we have poor communication with the public, and withholding information. I would help people to make better decisions. We have to be frank and open about this. The time has come. We're going to be 20 years since the volcano started. Montserrat has quite a story that will help not just the region, but the rest of the world. There are people further than the Caribbean who are affected by volcanoes, who are being moved backward and forward just like we were, when decisions should have been made that were not made. And this is where, again, independent countries will need the assistance of the United Nations and the outside world when they face a disaster like what we faced. We are fortunate that we have had Her Majesty's government to assist us. And we have focused more on what we can get from Britain. I must say that I'm guilty of that a lot. I'm sitting between two experts now who are going to make sure that I find, take advantage of what's in our region. And today's visit not just reminds me of what we can get, but what we have to give, if that's a reasonable answer to your question.
There's the one thing that I would like to raise. The appropriate person perhaps has raised it, and that is our involvement, participation, or relationship in Caricom. We know just at about 6 weeks ago, I was at a regional conference, and of course, it always comes up, Montserrat's position regarding its entrustments and its participation and sharing in Caricom. Fortunately, whenever I'm going to these things, I have one to go to coming up in a week's time, and I'm usually able to talk to Minister Hogan here, who puts me in position so I can really respond to that usual question, what is Montserrat's position with the entrustments? And so I ask, I believe that's part of something you would have dealt with when you're here, so can you tell us where we are?
I think we welcome the appropriate time when Montserrat will, through its entrustment, be able to accede to the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, but I think the government of Montserrat is in a better position to speak to where they are exactly on this matter now.
July 2014, when we did advise Caricom at a heads of government meeting held at Antigua, that we would have progress with the ratification of the revised treaty and then proceed to accession to it, following our own internal consultations with Her Majesty's government with respect to the treaty. It's something that has slipped because of elections, but the intention is that we will move to the process to achieve accession, and we'll start to do this year. Pretty much what it means is that we have already exchanged a document with the UK. We already have an entrustment to proceed, but as you know, before we can pass it into law, we need to basically agree the text with Her Majesty's government, as the Constitution stipulates that if there are things in there that they think that they want change in a particular way, or to be differently reflected, then we'll have to go back to Caricom and say, well, on our side we have these issues. Can we change the text to suit our partners? And if that is not going to be some great challenge to our obligations under the treaty, I think those would normally be granted, similar to what we did with the OECS treaty accession. So that is the same process we'll take, and we should arrive at a complete text within the competence of the government of Montserrat within this year.
I feel as if I would not just be rubber stamping something. As of today, I will be putting my heart into it, and the ministers are all involved. And that, to me, is what's most important about this visit, that it now gives us a fresh start as a new government, and especially with the Secretary General's commitment to involve the public, that whatever we do must involve the public. He speaks not only of the media, he speaks of the youth repeatedly. He speaks at the private sector, and also the word he uses, the grassroots. And I think that's where we've failed, that we're making decisions at a high level repeatedly over integration, and our people are not with us. And for me, whatever steps we take from here on need to, of course, involve our people in helping them to understand why we make these steps, the importance of integration, and the fact that we all have a similar history. We have a similar past, that we have similar experiences, we have similar needs, similar challenges, and also similar opportunities. So all the more reason for us to unite where possible and move forward, not just thinking of our own individual states, but collectively working together as partners, as he says. And there couldn't be any better time for us to make this step.
Do I understand, Minister Hogan, that we've now made the contact with Her Majesty's government? We are now working on this final step.
Well, we made the contact before this government, this administration came into office. Well, the timing of SG's visit, Secretary General's visit, certainly helps with accelerating as the Premier is saying, the knowledge among all of us now as to where we want to go. I would have been ahead of the game because I was leading as the change driver before, but naturally we have to get a more comprehensive, consolidated team approach where we're going, and I think that, as the Premier said, he is now more uplifted in his own spirits about the energy that he intends to lead on this issue. So yes, we will then follow from the fact that yes, the notification went out prior, and of course we've been dealing with OECS, Caricom matters. We've been participating fully. In fact, we're assuming the chairmanship of the Conference for Trade and Economic Development from next week, and we are fully participating, but we now want to make that consolidated step forward, which is to do what most Montserratians want us to do, to be formally recognized as part of the Caricom single market and economy.